Welcome to Mrs. Feighery's Chapter 35, America in World War II. When Japan attacked the United States at Pearl Harbor, millions of infuriated Americans, especially on the West Coast, instantly changed their views from isolationist to avenger. However, America, led by the wise Franklin Delano Roosevelt, resisted such pressures, instead taking a "get Germany first" approach to the war. If Germany were to defeat Britain before the Allies could beat Japan, there would be no stopping Hitler and his men. Meanwhile, just enough troops would be sent to fight Japan to keep it in check. America had the hardship of preparing for war since it had been in isolation for the preceding decades. Now that America was in the war, the question was whether or not the Allies would be able to stand long enough for America to retool itself for war production. Among America's tasks were to feed, clothe, and arm itself, as well as transport its forces to countries all over Europe. They were also to send food and munitions to allies who stretched from Russia to Australia. After the attack at Pearl Harbor, national unity strengthened, and the few Hitler supporters in America faded away. Most of America's ethnic groups assimilated even faster due to World War II, since in the decades before the war, few immigrants had been allowed into America. Executive Order number 9066 was issued following Pearl Harbor. After Pearl Harbor, Washington feared that Japanese Americans might act as saboteurs for Japan in case of invasion. This order affected 110,000 Japanese Americans on the Pacific coast who were sent to internment camps. 2/3 of them had been born in America. The 1944 case of Korematsu versus the United States affirmed the constitutionality of these camps. It took more than 40 years before the United States admitted fault and made $20,000 reparation payments to camp survivors. With the war, many New Deal programs were also wiped out, such as the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Works Progress Administration, and the National Youth Administration. Roosevelt said that Dr. New Deal was retiring and Dr. Win the War was its replacement. World War II was no idealistic crusade, as most Americans didn't even know what the Atlantic Charter was. The Atlantic Charter, just to remind everyone, was the declaration of U.S. goals going into the war, such as to fight Germany first and Japan second. During this time period, there was a campaign against the Japanese, especially on the West Coast, as is shown in this picture from Hollywood, California in 1923. Long before the Japanese Americans were interned during World War II as a security risk, they faced intense discrimination throughout the United States, as evidenced from this racially biased picture. Anti-Japanese posters were also created during World War II. They were used as government propaganda during the war and exploited racial stereotypes, often depicting Japanese people with big teeth and poor vision. Massive military orders, over $100 billion in 1942 alone, ended the Great Depression by creating a demand for jobs and for production. Shipbuilder Henry J. Kaiser was dubbed Sir Launch-A-Lot because his methods of ship assembly turned out one ship every 14 days, so American industry was picking up speed. The War Production Board halted manufacture of non-essential items such as passenger cars and focused on things that would help win the war. Under their direction, factories poured out 40 billion bullets, 300,000 aircraft, 76,000 ships, 86,000 tanks, and 2.6 million machine guns. When the Japanese seized vital rubber supplies in British Malaya and the Dutch East Indies, the U.S. imposed a national speed limit and a gasoline ration to help save tires. Farmers rolled out more food, but a new sudden spurt in production made prices soar, a problem that was finally solved by the regulation of prices by the Office of Price Administration. Full employment and scarce consumer goods brought on sharp inflation in 1942. The Office of Price Administration eventually brought down the prices with extensive regulations. You can see a propaganda poster about the OPA to your left in the video slide. Rationing held down domestic consumption, and the National War Labor Board imposed ceilings on wage increases. Many essential goods were rationed. Meanwhile, labor unions pledged not to strike during the war, but some did anyway. The United Mine Workers was one such group and was led by John L. Lewis. In June 1943, Congress passed the Smith-Connolly Anti-Strike Act, which let the federal government seize and operate industries threatened by or under strikes. Fortunately, strikes accounted for less than 1% of total working hours of the U.S. wartime labor force. We'll discuss more about building the war machine and increasing industrial production in our classroom lessons. This is our Works Cited page. All of the images used in this presentation are taken from the public domain.